Hi, my name is Andrzej Kudryavtsev and welcome to my workshop. Today we'll be doing an assembly of a MacroPot controller. Well, it comes as a bunch of different components and you can order it in different pieces. A kit of electronics, a kit of hardware, or all together. So this video is mainly to do a complete assembly. We'll start with assembly of our PCB, printed circuit board, first. Then we'll switch over to the programming with our microcontroller, which is a core piece of a MacroPot controller, and then we'll finish with our preparation of enclosure, drilling holes in enclosure, and attaching the acrylic panels, and get to a fully assembled unit. So let's get started. We will do the board first, and I'll share with you some quick steps and easy steps how to start assembly in the right order. The board is, once it's assembled, we will get it tested before we put that into the enclosure, and this is pretty much like how the test configuration looks. So that is a LCD attached to the board with our microcontroller underneath the board, and you may see that it's assembled from both sides. So there are some components on the front side and some components on the back side. I suggest we should start with assembly of our resistors. So we have resistors, a couple of diodes, we have some capacitors here. So we'll do that with resistors first. And first we will place the components according to the bill of material. What's important to understand that because MacroPot controller is really flexible, you might decide that you don't need all the MIDI inputs and MIDI outputs of a controller, or you don't need actually like an audio output of a controller. So you might decide that you don't need some pieces, and so you just mainly can skip these pieces and don't populate them. In this assembly guide I will assemble everything which is here, so you see the schematics is pretty much easy, not many parts here, and as I said we will first do that with resistors. So let's get started. So we got all resistors on the board, so now we flip the board and start soldering, and with that we basically do the front of the board first, and we do the bottom of the board. Alright, so all resistors soldered now, and we're moving to the next step, and let's solder the IC on this position. So make sure that's a pin 1 orientation. That's a pin 1 orientation on the IC. We are not using any IC sockets here because it matters. Here will be another layer on top of that. So again, flip over the board and solder IC. Next one would be push buttons. Okay, that goes on the top layer here. Just need some force to put them into a position. Make sure they're flat. Okay, now soldering this. So now it's pretty much done from this side of the board. We flip the board and we'll start with populating capacitors. That would be easy piece. There are 4 ceramic, or like in this case disc capacitors, and there is one electrolytic capacitor So let's do that. Okay, so we soldered capacitors on the back side of the board. Now it's time to finish some remaining pieces on the front side, and we need to solder a connector, female connector, for the OLED display. So what we are going to do, we take one big strip of our female connectors and we cut it in the way that we get only 4 of them, like this. That would be the most cost-effective way to do that. So that goes on this side actually. And here's our connector. Now to finish everything from this side, we finally soldering the encoder. So that's a special encoder with 2 LEDs built into the encoder and push button, of course. So that's why it has significantly more pins than a normal one. Be careful when you're installing this. So we got encoder and OLED connector in the position. So now flip the board back and we start soldering the Teensy pins. To do that, we will do the same tricks as we did with the OLED female connectors. We just take a bigger strip, cut it, so that would be exactly 14 pins. Just make sure it's cut into the size, because otherwise, you see, if I put it here, this is a place for the heater connection for one of the MIDI ports. So just make sure you have enough space here. Make sure when you're soldering you do that quick, because these are plastic pieces. You really want to do that quick per pin and don't overheat it. Now we, again, that's up to you, there's not many pieces left to solder. What I would prefer, because we finished this piece right now, let's take a Teensy board and let's make sure we solder that board to what we are going to do. So it's the same, we take 14 pins of a bigger strip. Don't push it all the way through, just make sure that Teensy can stay here. Just solder it quick and be very careful, because there are many surrounding pins around it. You don't want to cause any circuit short. Alright, so Teensy is done. Now what we have left here, we have our headers. Same idea. There are 5 2-pin headers that we need to solder. Again, cut it. And they go on the back side. So this is a front side. You see, because there is an enclosure, that's why that was so important to solder these components without any socket. So it just has exact dimension to be covered. Now let's solder this. Okay, so we got everything here. 5 2-pin headers, 4 for MIDI ports, so it's 3 MIDI outputs, 1 MIDI input, and 1 is for analog audio output. So we're pretty much done with the board. There is the only part that is currently not soldered. That's a LED which goes into that position. And here's a little bit trick. First of all, LED has a polarity. It has positive and negative. Inside LED you'll see two contacts. One is bigger, another one is smaller. So make sure that the bigger one oriented to the left. So I put that right this, so the bigger one sits on the left. But now here's a trick. The LED has to be off the board probably about like 5 millimeters is just right enough. And we will solder it like this. The reason we did it because LED will go through the enclosure and it's supposed to stay a little bit outside, so then the acrylic attached on top of that, it goes inside acrylic, and that's why you have that glowing around the acrylic glass. Now the next step, what we are going to do, we just attach everything and we don't put that inside enclosure. We do just a rough checks of the board, but in the meantime we will program our microcontroller Teensy. So I attached it here and I attached OLED screen. So that is just enough to test everything. Let's also put the button cups. So that's good enough. Let's start testing that. Everything that comes off a factory with some pre-programmed firmware on it, and basically it's just blinking its own LED, and that means that Teensy is working. You should not be able to see anything on the screen right now because our main program is not loaded. In order to load the program, we need to go in two steps. Why in two? The first one, of course, is one of the main programs that has to be inside Teensy, and Teensy has its own memory. The memory that's used to store the patches, to store the programs. By the default, that memory has some data in it, so we need to clean that memory first. To do so, let's do that the most simplest way, assuming that you have no experience with Teensy programming. And for that, we need to download Teensy Loader first. Teensy Loader is a simple application. It's a cross-platform application. So if you Google Teensy Loader, Teensy Loader. So you have version for Linux, Windows, and Macintosh. Obviously, we're running here Windows. Let's start that program. Great, and depends how you want to do that. I usually hit the auto button, so it will be auto programming my controller as soon as I push the button on the Teensy. So there's a small button here. I'm first going to load the firmware which cleans my EEPROM. So it's called EEPROM Clear. Just drop it over that window, and now press a button here. And it takes a bit of time first time because it installs the driver, and that is actually expected. So now it says reboot OK, and it's no longer blinking because I had a program that clears all the EEPROM content, and that replaced the default one. So it's done. Now again we will take our main firmware called MacroPot firmware, and we will drop it over that window again and push button. Alright, so our unit is started, and basically it's in some very clean configuration. There is no any configuration currently, no parameters, no any text data, but it's fully programmed. That's great. Now, in order to test it, of course, I see that at least my encoder is working, my OLED screen is working, and if I disconnect it and connect again, when I start, LED is working as well. That's great. Now we will keep that in this position, and we need to program the basic configuration. So that can be your main configuration, but basically that is a configuration of 10 macroses, and each of them is doing something different. Some of them just saying CC messages, some of them trigger multiple CC messages, but anyway, that's a default configuration. In order to do that, all the macroses programmed over the CSX, so it's a MIDI. What we're going to do, we just start the command line. You just type CMD and you get to the command line. Then we go to the directory with all the CSX scripts, and we basically need to change the directory in our command line. So we do CD and we just drop any file in it and leave only the path to the place where we have all the scripts. Press enter. So we are here. Now press dir and we have all our files here. We will be using an utility called send MIDI. It's extremely flexible utility. So first we need to make sure that send MIDI sees our MacroPot controller. So we say send MIDI and then list. And basically it lists all the MIDI devices connected to my system. One is basically generic Microsoft wavetable device, and 2 controllers. So MacroPot represents itself as 4 separate MIDI controllers inside it, and we will be using the first one, MacroPot, for programming. Good news that all the scripts are already ready for you, and all we need is just to run the script. We need to make sure that you see this MacroPot, and then everything will be working fine. So to start the programming for a CSX, we need to enter to the CSX. The reason why it doesn't do CSX programming automatically is to make sure that it doesn't, because you may use it with some synthesizers which also take CSX, so we don't really mess up with configuring MacroPot and sending CSX outside of MacroPot. So that's why CSX mode is separate. Now we push basically up and down button together at once, and you see it's a CSX mode. In this mode, so it's now ready to take all the CSX messages, and you may send multiple CSX messages at the same time. So such as in the configuration that we will be using, there are lots of messages coming, and let's just run it. It's called init .bat, and it takes a few seconds to program it, and it sends line after line after line, and you don't need to enter multiple times with MacroPot, but basically as soon as you're done with programming, you just press the up button and done. So you are currently operating all the default configurations of a MacroPot, and all the default macros programmed. In the same way, you'll be programming your own macroses, but that at least guarantees that everything is working. So just to test the basic functionality, we may start Windows MIDI aux application, which is just a simple MIDI monitor. We make sure that all the ports are selected here, and now just rotate the knob and you will see that it sends the messages to the MIDI aux. Everything is working. So that's just good enough to run a basic test, and you see the also the shaft is changing its color. I'm pretty sure everything else is working just fine. There's nothing to really make wrong here. Alright, so with that, we are now moving to the enclosure. This piece is done. and we will start working on enclosure. To do a work on enclosure, basically we need a few components here. Enclosure, we need 2 acrylic glasses, and check this out. One glass has slightly bigger, well, it's more thick than this one. This one is thinner, so that's a top glass. It's thinner. It can be on the same thickness. Doesn't really matter, but this one has to be 3mm. There is no excuse to this, because what will happen, the OLED screen, that basically, that's your glass, that would be OLED screen, it has to be totally protected by that glass. That's why it has to be a 3mm. And the top one doesn't really matter. I'm using the smallest that I can find, so that's probably about 1mm, maybe slightly more, I don't know. Okay, first, before starting the drilling, we need to understand where we actually need to drill. So to help you with that, we just take these original prints of this acrylic glass, and it's there in PDF, so as soon as you print that on your printer, they are printed 1-to-1, so you can trust these dimensions. I also have a special sketch where basically every component has a center piece, so that would be easier for me, first of all, just to cut that piece, then lay it over the enclosure, and then start drilling these components. To do that, actually, I already cut that. This is my piece here. I just lay it over, and now I need a tool. We can do it first. Let's make sure that it's a fully parallel, and we can do it with Sharpie. Okay, let's make sure that everything is in the correct position, and this is our layout for drilling. Okay, so we have everything marked here. Now we'll take a core tool and just press hard. Okay, so we are ready for drilling the front side, then we'll go to the rear sides for MIDI sockets. I'm using a drill bit 2.5mm here on the side, because then we'll be doing a 3mm threads, and we'll go to that later. So okay, so now it's time to change the drill bit, make these holes bigger to the size of their buttons and encoder, and so we also will be using a bigger drill bit to make that as a square. Okay, let's move here. this one is good enough, we will work on that just later, and so these two remaining. I changed the drill bit again. Currently size doesn't matter. We will just need to make it bigger. So this is our final step. Check it through the size. Oh, we need it bigger. The real diameter of that actually does matter, because we will get acrylic plates anyway covering all of these holes. This is just perfect. And so let's take the board and quickly check it. Obviously these three just right. Still have to work on this one. Okay, so you don't really need to be accurate with this, because this will be covered. We just need to check that the size matches okay. You know, at this point I will remove the Teensy outside. I'll tell you later why. So you see, it's almost there. This is our LED, our buttons, everything is in the right place. Okay, now let's work on the back side. This will be quick. The trick is, because we moved Teensy so close, we need to make sure that we cut here a piece so it goes just a little bit inside. So I put Teensy in a position, it's not fully inside the socket, but just enough for me to take marks here. Okay, and now take everything outside and just do some small dip. Okay, great. Now we can assemble everything. And the only missing piece is, because we will be covering it with lower part, so we need to do the same on this part, because it has a shape form here. like this. Alright, so this one is done as well. It might be easier to use a Dremel tool. But you see now, as soon as it's assembled, it holds everything in the right position. And it's very tight. Alright. With that, let's now move to these parts. The only piece is now we need to drill holes for 3.5mm TRS connectors here, and the idea is pretty much the same. So mark with a piece of paper the location of these holes. So they have to be, so there are 4 holes on this side, and these are for MIDI connectivity, and 1 hole will be here, that's for audio. The distance between them is 33mm. And so the distance means the distance between each is about 11mm. In that way they will be sitting close together but still not close, so they are not touching each other, and it's still enough place inside it so they all have a space. Okay, again, let's use a chord tool and mark all of these positions. And now let's drill first smaller holes and then do bigger. Change the drill bit, and in that case we'll be using 8mm drill bit. Okay, so let's check everything. So you may see they are very close, but just right enough to put the screws and to fit between the board. Alright, so final missing piece. We need to solder TRS connectors. And that can be really important, depends what type of TRS specification you want to follow. There are 2 specifications, TRS A and TRS B. The only difference between them is how the tip and ring pin are assigned. Sleeve pin is always a ground pin, no matter what specification it is, A or B. But in certain cases, the tip can be a number 5 pin on a DIN5 connector, and it's a specification TRS A. and the ring pin is number 4 pin on this connector, on DIN5 connector, or the tip can be pin 4 and the ring can be pin 5, and that's a TRS-B specification. Again, pretty much doesn't matter how you solder that on this side, you always have a flexibility, and that's why I'm using connector of headers of different colors, to flip it between orientation, one orientation or another orientation. And if by some reason you connected it wrong, you will never destroy the MIDI circuit, because MIDI circuit is designed in a way that if you connected it wrong, then it will be another diode path, but anyway, that won't burn the circuit. But it's always good to follow the specification and understand what you're doing, so let's solder that first, and then on the final assembly we will inspect what should be the proper connection. But this will be after we've done the enclosure, after we paint enclosure and let it dry for 24 hours. So what I'm going to do, I just take all the pins. I have a tube heat treating tube, and let me just solder it. You'll see that there are 4 pins on this connector. That's because this is a TRS with an additional 4 pin. That's something that you typically see on your earbuds with microphone. We will be using only 2 pins, and we will be using that on the 4 MIDI ports, because we basically will be only soldering the ring and tip. That's why you see 2 pins here only. We are not soldering ground, we don't need ground. And on the audio connector, on the audio output on this connector, we'll be only soldering the tip and sleeve, and that's it. So for that reason, the 4 will be 4 of one specification and 5 of another specification, and that will be audio. We will be using pin number 3 marked here, and pin number 2, which actually represents, pin 3 represents tip, pin number 2 represents sleeve in that case, in that configuration. And for audio connector, that would be a pin number 3 and pin number B, or at least this is how I can read it, B here. And pretty much that's it. So let's get that finished, let's keep soldering, and then we will move to the enclosure. So our enclosure is almost ready. Before we start painting this, there is one little step that we need to do. As you remember, acrylic panels go on top of that, and then we have a screw which goes through the acrylic panel. So basically we need to cut a screw now. This hole was 2.5mm because we used 2.5mm drill bit here, and now we have a screw cutter here, and we just need to make sure that we can at least barely cut a screw here. Because it's aluminum enclosure, it's a pretty soft material, so be very careful. We need to hold the position of that screw cutter really as much as we can perpendicular to the enclosure, so 90 degrees, and we have to do that carefully. And just to get a couple of spins here, and after a few, you already got a feeling that you got a thread. Just make sure that it's deep enough so to our screws that we are using here. Okay. Yeah, you see, there's a nice screw here. We need to do 3 more and we'll be done with this enclosure. Alright, so we're moving to the final stage of the painting process of our enclosures. I made 3 that I'm going to paint today. I got my gloves and my safety glasses, so we are good and protected. There are a few tools that we need right now. First of all is a primer. That's a paint. I'll be using a glossy paint, but I'll try to combine it together with primer. So I'll do 1 layer of primer, 1 thin layer of glossy paper paint. So that would be like a really satin type of texture to that. We need stone, and I'm also I want to use a P1000 sandpaper. We will start first of all with just like a little bit sanding these enclosure boxes. They came obviously from China. They were sanded before, but because we did some work here, first of all I want to make sure that there are no new handle pieces which are left here. Just sand it quickly. Remove the first layer just a little bit, so that would be then easier for paint to take onto that. This one is quickly sanded right now. We're going to use acetone and just make sure there are no any pieces left here, and prepare that for painting. Be careful with acetone. You have to wear gloves to work with this. Now we need to prepare that for painting. I'll be using this just to put it like this so we can paint it all around. And I will start with a primer layer and then let it to dry about an hour, and we'll do a final paint layer. So we painted the enclosure and got it dried for a day. So now we're back to assembly. This is the enclosure. So I put 2 primer layers and I put a final glossy layer, and it looks pretty nice to me right now. Again, you have lots of flexibility to paint in any color you wish. So it can be blue, it can be yellow, or whatever color you want. Now let's get started and put all of that together. We have not that many parts actually. So first what I would do, I would start with assembly of these, and it goes pretty nice. Get all the way through inside. And so looks good to me. And now let's put a washer and a screw here. Tighten them together. Nice. And now we can put all the connectors. So in the meantime I soldered all the connectors. These are for MIDI. To get it soldered, you need to use only tip and ring connections of a TRS jack. And I'm not using ground at all. If we need to use it, we can always put a small wire and get ground here. Now we just put all of them inside. Oh, let's start with this actually. Well, it gets pretty tight inside, and also, as you may see, I have pretty long wires here. Did that on purpose, so at least for the first time you don't know the exact length that you need to cut, so that would be more safe just to put it longer. Certainly there is a space inside it, even for longer. Try to make it look good, and as you may see, so now we need to get into the pinout of this. So we go back to the assembly manual and scroll down all the way through until we get to this page. And this is basically the assignment of all the headers. Here we have one MIDI input, we have 3 MIDI outputs in different places, we have PWM output, which is a pulse width modulation output circuitry, and we are also probably going to use audio output of the DAC. I will explain that a little bit later, but let's get started with this one. What's important to know is the pin 1 orientation, because it's critical for types of TRS to MIDI adapters that you are going to use. In my case, I have my own pre-wired adapters, which I just did based on their specification TRS-A. So there are two specifications, that's important to know. There are two specifications. One specification says that basically the connector 5 of the DIN connector goes to the tip, and connector 4 goes to the ring, while our specification says connector 4 goes to the ring and connector 5 goes to the tip. So it depends actually what gear you're using. For instance, if you have like an adapter which is included with Arturia, that's the adapter that I got with my Arturia, it's based on the Arturia specification, so it can be frustrating what specification you're using. So I put here a table, which I actually got from a MIDI.org website, where it says actually Arturia is TRS-B spec. Fine, this is what we, just for later use, we will know that it's a TRS-B. Anyway, it's very difficult to damage if by some reason you mess up with the pin orientation, because anyway it's designed to protect against this type of shorts, and that's not a big deal if you put it like a pin 1 to tip, and then you decide that actually you had to do with another spec, and you had to connect pin 1 to the ring, so you just can't flip it. That's fine. Go back to this spec. If I want to match it to the type A TRS specification, that basically means that all my red wires, which I soldered here to the tip, they go to the pin 1, which I also marked red. That's important. Everything else, fine. So let's first align it in the positions. I want this connector to be my MIDI input, and these 3 be my MIDI outputs, 1, 2, 3 outputs. So I will follow this, look at this pin out of this connector. So this is my MIDI input, it's right here, and the pin 1 is on top. So I'm going to put this. So done. Okay, they all right here. Now I do the same for my MIDI output number 1, it's over here, and in following that pin 1 orientation, I will put this to red to pin 1 and black to pin 2. And finally, I have 2 and 3 left here. Number 2 goes in the same way on another header here, and sometimes just need to make sure that you have enough space here, enough room for all the pins. Nice, I think I'm good with that. Again, it's very packed. And final number 3. Number 3 is over here. Exactly the same. And pin 1. So that piece is done. You still have enough room to put all the wires here inside. That's good. Now we are doing the audio assembly. You'll wonder why I have 3 wires actually here. I wanted to be like a little bit more creative from the original spec. So we have a PWM output from the circuitry here, and we have integrated on Teensy 3.2 DAC, which is a 12-bit DAC. Actually, I want to use both. I want to use PWM and I want to use DAC. And my idea was I will connect tip to the DAC, ring to the PWM, and sleeve to the ground. Did that. Again, this is my assignment of a PWM connector, and I will follow that orientation. I will put red to pin 1 and this is how it goes inside here. So you see they can be very close, but with all the measurements I still have enough room to put all of them together. And not here. Be careful with this, not to scratch your new paint. It's better to use wrench, actually. And this one is just a little bit more trickier than others because there is no pin header for this. What we are going to use, we actually need to solder it down to the Teensy controller to this pin. So now I will start my solder iron and I will quickly solder it here. Alright, so it's done. You may decide that you don't need it. You may even decide that you don't need the audio output connector, which can be audio, that can be your CV voltage within the audio range voltage. It can be some pulse triggers, whatever you decide to do. It's not enabled in the default MacroPot firmware. It's easy to do within the Teensy framework to define something that you want to do. Actually, it sends some pulses by the default, but again, you can always program it very easily and graphically too. That's the advantage of the Teensy, that for audio programming you have lots of flexibility with doing audio. Okay, now let's do the quick measurements. And this is our bottom piece. So then it gets all together. It gets very tight together because basically this piece, it pushes really hard on all of these pins, and that's how we keep them within the position. But this is not just like this, because it also has some open parts, and of course we painted this part, so assume that's, well, it's not conductive, but I still want to put a little place of the black tape, a little piece on this place next to the connector, next to the Teensy board and USB connector. So you cannot see it, but I think it's a good idea to have it here. And also you see that how close it is right now. And what I want to do, I want to also put on the Teensy chip itself, I want to put a thermal interface. Teensy doesn't get hot, don't get me wrong, but it can be multiple configurations of the Teensy where you can overclock it to a very high frequency and it will be a little bit warm. And anyway, this piece of a thermal interface is like a 3mm one. it can hold everything within position. Even you're holding it here, having another piece here, over here is always good. Alright, so we almost finished this piece, and we, I think, can screw the enclosure. Always, actually, it's a good idea to test it before you finally assemble it, so I will just gently screw it all together and make sure that it's all working first. We almost finished it. Great. The only piece which is left right now is our OLED display, which is here. What I would like to do now is, again, take a piece of tape and put this piece next to the connector. You will not see this anyway, because it will be, everything will be closed with acrylic glass, no matter actually what color you use, and it goes black on black, so you don't see it. What's important to know, I got these OLED screens assembled. The thing is, the way it's constructed, it goes all the way through here, through the 4 pins into 4 pins. You can see it here. And you may see that currently it stands too high. What I need to do, I need to put it down so it almost laying over the screen lays on top of the enclosure. Then we put this assembly first, that would be our transparent acrylic glass, and then we will close this one, the blue one. You have lots of flexibility to go with different colors. I like blue, I think it's a really good combination, black and blue. So, to get it assembled properly, and because it has been already pre-soldered, I want to cut these black pieces because they don't let these go all the way through. Just some patience. And you will do that eventually. Okay. And because I removed this black plastic, I also need to cut over the length a bit. Nice. Now you may see that it's right, it's all in the right place. Okay, we may start assembly. We will be using these screws, and that's a 3mm that we put the thread for. And before doing that, I think that's a good idea to check at least basic functionality. So I'm going to connect it and just make sure that at least it starts. Alright, it's working. All OLEDs are working. Everything is good. This is very nice. Okay, put this acrylic glass first, and this might be a good idea to make sure there's no dust also on the face, that you'll see then, and put this acrylic glass on top of that. This is how they will be assembled together. And before we do that, actually, I want to put a glue inside threads. You can use everything you want for this. You can use your, nail paint. This one is basically special Chinese thread glue, and our goal is just to make sure that as soon as we start everything assembling together, all our screws stays in a place and they don't move. Also, I'm using Torx here. Okay, look better. Try to do that a bit first, don't tighten. Put everything into the position, and only after that you can tighten all of them together. Keep in mind, this is aluminum enclosure. Aluminum is very soft material actually. And it's a metal. It's very soft metal, so it's very easy to over tighten the screw and damage a thread. And this is what we don't want to do. I think it's all good. And finally, because of this length and the distance here, actually, and the fact that it has a push button, so it has to press. What I'm going to use just a piece of paper that I put here. Great. So it's just right enough to still have a distance between their last top layer of acrylic and a button, so you can still press it and you feel it. Great. So it's all assembled together. Finally do the final checks, and I think that now we can move to the programming. So we're done actually. Get cables for you, start programming, and start using it. Goodbye.